Good morning, everyone. Yesterday we started with the new point from the unit number 4, that is peripheral nervous system. So, first of all, we will summarize the things which we have studied in yesterday's lecture. So, the first is we have studied about organization of nervous system. So, it is basically organized into central and peripheral nervous system. So, central nervous system, it consists of brain and spinal cord. Then peripheral nervous system, it has certain components. We have defined these components. That is, first component is nerve. It is bundle of axons. Then ganglia, it is singular is ganglion. It is bundle of, or it is collection of the cell bodies of the neurons. Then plexus, it is called as network of neurons. And last terminology or last component that we have studied, it is sensory receptor. It is the structure of nervous system that monitors the changes in the external or internal environment. Okay. So divisions of peripheral nervous system, basically three divisions. First division is somatic nervous system. Second division is autonomic nervous system, and third division is enteric nervous system. Okay, so somatic nervous system, autonomic nervous system, and enteric nervous system, they have some commonalities in between them. That is, both all of these types or divisions of peripheral nervous system have sensory neurons which carry nerve impulse from the periphery to the center, and secondly the motor neurons which carry the nerve impulse away from the central nervous system to the periphery. Okay, so somatic nervous system, it particularly controls the actions of the skeletal muscle. The autonomic nervous system, it controls the actions of the organs and tissues which are located in the visceral area, in the viscera. Viscera means which are present deep within the body. And the enteric nervous system, it controls the actions of the gastrointestinal tract, and its motor neurons of enteric nervous system, they receive impulse from the autonomic motor neurons. Okay, so understand this difference, that unlike of that of somatic nervous system and autonomic nervous system, the enteric motor neurons are not directly connected to the central nervous system. uh, they are connected to the autonomic nervous system, and which control its actions. Okay, so let's start with the autonomic nervous system. So it has two divisions, that is sympathetic and parasympathetic division. So yesterday we have studied the sympathetic division, and today we are going to see parasympathetic division. So in short, the anatomy of ANS motor divisions. So it is a two neuron system, that is one neuron whose cell body lies into the central nervous system, and its axon terminals lie into the ganglion. Okay, then this neuron is called as preganglionic nerve fiber. And then next neuron, second neuron in the autonomic nervous system motor division, is the postganglionic neuron. Okay, so its cell body lies into the autonomic ganglia, and its axon terminals, they innervate the effector organ. Okay, so the axon terminals of preganglionic neuron and the cell body of the postganglionic neuron, they lie into the autonomic ganglia. Okay, so next is sympathetic nervous system. The responses which we get from the sympathetic nervous system, they are of type, that is fight or flight responses. So structurally, they have the common structure as that of the uh, autonomic nervous system motor neuron, that is preganglionic neuron, autonomic ganglia, and postganglionic neuron. So what about preganglionic neuron? They are shorter in length and they arise from the thoracic and the lumbar region. That's why they are called as thoracolumbar outflow. And the autonomic ganglia, uh, there are two types of autonomic ganglia in case of sympathetic nervous system. First one is sympathetic trunk ganglia, and second one is prevertebral ganglia. Prevertebral ganglia, it is present anteriorly to the vertebral column, and the sympathetic trunk ganglia, they are present laterally to the vertebral column. The postganglionic neurons, they are longer in length and they originate in the autonomic ganglia, and what is their function is to innervate the effector organs. So in the ganglia, the preganglionic nerve fibers, they, on receiving nerve impulse, they release acetylcholine as the neurotransmitter, which acts upon the receptors which are present on the cell body of the postganglionic neuron, and the type of receptors which are present, that is nicotinic acetylcholine receptors. So in case once these acetylcholine activates this nicotinic acetylcholine receptor, nerve impulse generates in the postganglionic nerve fiber. Then it travels to the axon terminals of the postganglionic nerve fiber. There, it causes release of the neurotransmitter, that is noradrenaline or norepinephrine. Okay, and this neurotransmitter which is released then acts upon the adrenergic receptors which are present on the effector organ. Okay, so once they act upon this adrenergic receptor, a biological effect is produced. There are certain exceptions to this, that in certain cases the neurotransmitter released by the postganglionic nerve fibers of the sympathetic nervous system is different. In case of sweat glands, it is the acetylcholine, and in case of the uh, chromaffin cells themselves act as a specialized type of postganglionic nerve fiber, and they release the noradrenaline and adrenaline as hormones. Okay, and the third exception to this situation is of the neurons which innervate or which terminate in the kidney, which releases the neurotransmitter as dopamine. Okay, so this is this diagram we have seen, and we have stopped yesterday till this diagram. So let's start with the uh, functions of sympathetic nervous system. Also we have seen responsible for up and down regulation of homeostatic mechanisms, then also is responsible for priming the body for action. Priming means preparing the body for action. Then next is we have seen that in certain regions of the body we can find certain type of adrenergic receptors, that is alpha 1 receptors in the blood vessels that are flowing through the skin, digestive tract and the kidneys, and the beta 2 receptors are present in the areas like skeletal muscles, heart and lungs. So this neurotransmitter, that is noradrenaline, when acts on the alpha 1 receptor, it causes vasoconstriction, and when the epinephrine or adrenaline, which is released by the adrenal medulla, acts upon the beta 2 receptor on the skeletal muscle, then heart and the lungs causes the vasodilation. Okay, so because the pressure difference is created, the blood flows from the non-essential areas like skin, gastrointestinal tract and the kidneys to the essential organs which are required in emergency situations like the heart, lungs and brain. Okay, sorry for that. So this is the various structures that are innervated by the sympathetic nervous system and the effects of stimulation of it. Okay, so let's start with today's point, that is on the parasympathetic nervous system. So it is one of the main divisions of the ANS, and it primarily functions to stimulate rest and digest responses. Okay, so as we have studied earlier, that the divisions of the autonomic nervous system, they function exactly opposite to each other. Okay, so the sympathetic nervous system, it is more active, or it is more dominant when there is a condition of emergency. Okay, but this parasympathetic nervous system, it is dominant when there is condition of resting condition. Okay, while you rest, while you are sleeping, the parasympathetic tone of your body will be dominant one. That's why it is called as rest and digest. And whatever effects produced by the parasympathetic nervous system, they actually help you to get rest as well as digest the food. That's why it is called as rest and digest. So structurally it is similar to that of the normal structure, that it has three components: preganglionic neuron, autonomic ganglia, and postganglionic neuron. So let's see what is the difference between sympathetic and parasympathetic in this regard. So preganglionic neurons of the parasympathetic nervous system, they are longer in length. They originate from the cervical and the sacral region of the spinal cord. That's why they are called as craniosacral outflow. You should understand this very clearly, that as their point of origin from the cervical region and the sacral region, that's why they are called as cranio. That means from cranium. If you see the cervical part of the uh, spinal cord, it is closer to the cranium or the skull. That's why it is called as craniosacral. Sacral half part, as the half of the parasympathetic nerves, they arise from the sacral part of the spinal cord. That's why it is called as craniosacral outflow. And what about the length of it? They are longer in nature. Please recall that sympathetic preganglionic nerves, they are shorter in length, exactly opposite. Okay, the next about autonomic ganglia, terminal or intramural ganglia, that is located close to or in wall of visceral organ. Okay, so intramural means inside the tissue or inside the organ. Okay, so as the preganglionic nerve fibers are longer in length, uh, the ganglia are actually present in the tissue or effector organ, or they are present in close vicinity to the tissue or organ. Okay, then what about postganglionic neuron? They are shorter in length, and they originate in autonomic ganglia, and they innervate the effector organ. So let's see next, that is at the synapse within the ganglia, the preganglionic neurons release acetylcholine, a neurotransmitter that activates nicotinic acetylcholine receptors on postganglionic neurons. So this is same as that of the sympathetic nervous system. Preganglionic neuron releasing the neurotransmitter acetylcholine, which is acting on the nicotinic acetylcholine receptor present on the postganglionic neuron. Okay, so once this acetylcholine occupies or activates the nicotinic acetylcholine receptor, what happens? The nerve impulse is generated in the postganglionic nerve fiber, and this uh, nerve impulse, when reaches to the axon terminals of the postganglionic nerve fibers, they release acetylcholine. Now it is different from that of the sympathetic nervous system, in which the postganglionic nerve fibers release noradrenaline. Okay, in case of postganglionic nerve fibers of the parasympathetic nervous system, they release acetylcholine, and the released acetylcholine then activates muscarinic receptor which are present on the effector organ. Okay, please understand this very clearly. I will draw a diagram in later parts. Then I will compare the two, that is parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system. Okay, the activation of the target tissue receptors causes effects associated with the parasympathetic system. Okay, so these muscarinic receptors, when activated by the acetylcholine released by the postganglionic nerve fiber, then causes the or produces the effect. Okay, so this is how this is all what you can see, that this is the cervical part of the spinal cord from which the preganglionic nerve fibers of the parasympathetic nervous system they originate, and they end up into the ganglia which are present near vicinity to that of the effector organ, or they might be present in the organ itself. Okay, and from this ganglia the postganglionic nerve fibers they originate, and uh, then they innervate the effector organ. Okay, so in these ganglia the nerve endings of the preganglionic nerve fiber release the acetylcholine, and which acts on the receptors, that is nicotinic acetylcholine receptors present on the wall of postganglionic nerve. Okay, so once this acetylcholine activates nicotinic receptors, the impulse generated into the postganglionic nerve fiber, which causes release of acetylcholine by the axon terminals of the postganglionic nerve fiber, which acts on the muscarinic receptor which is present on the effector organ. So when acetylcholine activates muscarinic receptor, we get a physiological effect. So this is all in one diagram only. It is all enlisted or summarized. Okay. So we have parasympathetic nerve fiber, we have sympathetic nerve fiber, then we have in sympathetic nerve fiber only, but that is innervating the sweat glands. Then we have sympathetic nerve fibers, post-sympathetic nerve fibers, which end up in the kidney or which innervate the kidney. So let's see the difference. The lengthwise, the preganglionic nerve fibers of the parasympathetic nervous system is longer, so it is shown like this. So these preganglionic nerve fibers they release acetylcholine in the autonomic ganglia. This acetylcholine acts on the nicotinic receptor which is present on the surface of the postganglionic nerve fiber. The nerve potential is generated in postganglionic nerve fiber, which then causes release of acetylcholine, and this acetylcholine acts on muscarinic receptor present on the effector organ, and we get a physiological effect. Okay, so in case of parasympathetic nervous system, there is no exception to this. In all of the parasympathetic nerves, it will be the same. Okay, but in sympathetic nervous system, there are exception to this case. That in case of sympathetic nervous system, the preganglionic nerve fibers they will release the acetylcholine in the autonomic ganglia. There is no difference in the events that happen in the autonomic ganglia across the parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system. But what changes if they are occurring, they occur at this level, that is postganglionic nerve fiber and the effector organ. So in case of normally sympathetic nervous system, the postganglionic nerve fibers, they will release norepinephrine or noradrenaline, which will act on the receptor, that is adrenergic receptor, alpha or beta receptors, which are present on the effector organ, and then we will get, on activation of these receptors, we will get a physiological response. Exception to this case is in case of the sweat glands. The autonomic ganglia events, they are same, but about postganglionic nerve fibers, they will release the acetylcholine on activation, and this acetylcholine then will act on the muscarinic receptor present on the effector organ, and when acetylcholine activates this muscarinic receptor present on effector organ, we get a physiological response. In case of sweat glands, the physiological response is sweating. Okay, so in case of dopaminergic, another exception to this is that in case of postganglionic neurons innervating the kidney, instead of acetylcholine or norepinephrine, they will release dopamine, which is another type of neurotransmitter, which will act on the dopamine receptors present on the effector organ, and activation of these dopamine receptors will produce a physiological response. Okay, so now, the third exception to this, which we have already enlisted, about the adrenal medulla, chromaffin cells of adrenal medulla. Over here, the postganglionic neuron, it is a, or it is a specialized a type of neuron over here, because as such it is not a neuron, it is a cell that acts as a postganglionic nerve fiber. Okay, so the preganglionic nerve fiber innervates the chromaffin cells of the adrenal gland, where these chromaffin cells on activation will cause release of epinephrine or adrenaline, and norepinephrine or noradrenaline, and these released hormones or the transmitters then will act on the adrenergic receptors present on the effector organs and will produce the physiological effect. Okay, so the functions of the parasympathetic nervous system, they are enlisted over here. You can find the same chart in the book Tortora. So it is my kind request to you all that please refer Tortora for the these particular effects on stimulation of the parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system. Why you have to refer? Because it is most probably that you will get a question on this in your question paper, so it is like 100% possibility. Okay, so neurotransmitters which are there in the sympathetic autonomic nervous system. So again, this is the repetition of it, of whatever we have seen. We'll just see uh, one by one. So in sympathetic autonomic ganglia, neurotransmitter released by the preganglionic neuron, it is acetylcholine. Okay, so neurotransmitter which is released by the postganglionic neuron at most of the effector organs, it is norepinephrine or noradrenaline. Okay, it is one and the same thing. Always remember. Okay, so neurotransmitter which is released by the postganglionic neuron at sweat gland, which is the first exception, it is acetylcholine. Okay, neurotransmitter released by the postganglionic neuron in adrenal medulla, which is second exception, it is epinephrine and norepinephrine. The next is neurotransmitter released by the postganglionic neuron in kidney, which is third exception, is the dopamine. Okay. So next, the we'll discuss the receptors in the sympathetic autonomic nervous system. So in autonomic ganglia, the receptor which is present on the cell body of the postganglionic nerve, it is nicotinic, that is neuronal cholinergic receptor. On most of the effector organs, you can find alpha 1 or 2, that is there are two subtypes of the alpha receptor, that is alpha 1 receptor and alpha 2 receptor, and there are three subtypes of the beta receptor, that is beta 1, beta 2 and beta 3 adrenergic receptor. On sweat gland, we can find the muscarinic cholinergic receptor. So you should understand this very clearly that the adrenergic receptor, there are two subtypes, that are alpha and beta receptors, and in cholinergic receptors again there are two subtypes, that is nicotinic receptor and the muscarinic receptor. Okay. So on blood vessels in kidney, you can find that is dopaminergic receptors, and the neurotransmitter which is released by the postganglionic nerve fiber innervating kidney, they are the dopamine, that is dopamine. Okay. So neurotransmitter in the parasympathetic autonomic nervous system. So in there are no surprises in the parasympathetic autonomic nervous system, it is straightforward. That is, the in parasympathetic autonomic ganglia, neurotransmitter released by the preganglionic neuron, it is acetylcholine. Okay. So neurotransmitter which is released by the postganglionic neuron near effector organ, it is also the acetylcholine. Okay. So the receptors in the parasympathetic autonomic nervous system, they are in parasympathetic autonomic ganglia, it is nicotinic, that is neuronal cholinergic receptor, and on effector organ, it is muscarinic cholinergic receptor. Again, there are five subtypes in it, that is type 1 to type 5, that is M1, M2, M3, M4 and M5. Okay. So signals in the ANS, this particular part we will study in next lecture. So we should stop over here only. So I will, that's all from my side. Okay. Thank you.